The frost was thick on the inside of my canopy, a jagged web of ice that turned the world outside into a blurred gray ghost of a landscape. At 38,000 feet, the air doesn't just get thin, it turns into a vacuum that tries to suck the very soul out of your lungs. My lungs felt like they were being scraped with sandpaper every time I drew a breath of bottled oxygen. Below me, the German border was a jagged line of white and black, hidden under a floor of clouds that looked like a frozen ocean. I was alone. The rest of my flight had dropped off miles ago, their engines choking or their pilots losing their nerve as the altimeter needles spun into places no man was ever meant to go. But I kept climbing. I could hear the Merlin engine screaming, a high-pitched metallic wail that sounded like a dying banshee. Up here, there is no sound of wind, only the vibration of the airframe and the frantic beating of your own heart against your ribs. I looked up, and the sky wasn't blue anymore. It was a deep, bruised purple, fading into a terrifying black that whispered about the edge of space. Somewhere in that void, a Junkers Ju-86 was loitering, thinking it was safe. It thought it was untouchable. They called this the ceiling of the world, and the Germans believed they owned the roof. They were wrong. November 1944, over the Rhineland, and I was about to show them that the sky has no masters, only those brave or stupid enough to claim it. The manual said the Spitfire Mark 7 would redline at 35,000. The brass told us that trying to dogfight at that height was suicide because the wings wouldn't have enough lift to turn, and one wrong move would send you into a flat spin you'd never wake up from. But I wasn't thinking about the manual. I was thinking about the reconnaissance photos that Junkers was carrying. Photos of our troop movements, our supply lines, the very things that would decide if the boys in the 101st lived through the next week. I had a choice. Stay at 30,000 and watch him glide by like a ghost, or push the throttle through the wire and see if my heart or the engine gave out first. I pushed the throttle. What happened in the next 10 minutes didn't just break the rules of aviation. It changed the way we looked at the sky forever. I could see the glint of the sun off the German's glass nose now, a tiny silver needle in a haystack of infinite black. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the brutal, bone-deep cold that seeped through my heated suit. I could smell the ozone and the faint, metallic tang of the oxygen system, a scent that always reminded me of the hospital where my kid brother died. It was the smell of the end. I grew up walking the high steel in Brooklyn. My old man was an iron worker, one of the guys who built the skyline while the rest of the world looked up and wondered how we didn't fall. By the time I was 16, I was sitting on a 4-inch beam hundreds of feet above the East River, eating a ham sandwich while the wind tried to tear my clothes off. You learn something about height when you're an iron worker. You learn that the height isn't the enemy, the fear of it is. You learn to trust your balance and the steel under your boots. When the war broke out, the army wanted me in the infantry because I was built like a mule, but I told them I'd already spent my life looking down at the world. I wanted to see it from even higher. They laughed when I said I wanted to fly the high-altitude birds. They said a kid from the docks didn't have the finesse for it. But finesse doesn't keep you alive when your blood is boiling in your veins and your engine is gasping for air. Grit does, and I had enough grit to fill a quarry. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The Junkers pilot saw me when I was about 2 miles out. I saw his tail twitch, a slow, sluggish movement that betrayed how difficult it was to maneuver in that thin, frozen soup. At that altitude, every turn takes a mile. Every adjustment is a gamble. I saw him start to climb, trying to use his pressurized cabin to his advantage. He thought he could just outclimb a Spitfire. He didn't realize that this wasn't just any Spitfire. We'd stripped the paint, polished the leading edges, and tuned that Merlin until it hummed like a Swiss watch. I felt the stick get mushy in my hands, the controls losing their bite as the air grew too thin to push against. It's a terrifying feeling, like your car tires losing grip on a patch of black ice, only you're 6 miles up, and there's nothing to catch you but the graveyard. I had to use the rudder more than the ailerons, kicking the tail around to keep my nose pointed at that silver speck. My vision was starting to tunnel. I could see the rivets on my own wings vibrating, and I wondered if the airframe would just shatter from the stress. I remembered my mentor back at the training field in England, a wiry old RAF vet named Flight Lieutenant Smokey Joe. He used to sit us down in the pub and talk about the sky like it was a living thing. "The air up there is a jealous mistress, Frank," he'd say, puffing on a pipe that smelled like cherry tobacco and old wool. "She doesn't want you there. She'll try to freeze your blood and stop your heart. You don't fight her, you dance with her. You feel the vibration in the seat of your pants, and you listen to what she's telling you." Right then, At 39,000 feet, I could hear her. She was telling me I was at the limit. The Spitfire was shuddering, a violent, rhythmic thumping that felt like someone was hitting the fuselage with a sledgehammer. But the German was closer now. I could see the black crosses on his wings. I could see the rear gunner struggling to bring his weapon to bear, his movements slow and heavy in his thick winter gear. I had a wingman once, a kid named Leo from Nebraska. Leo was a natural pilot, better than me in a dogfight at 10,000 feet. But the first time we went up into the thin stuff, he panicked. He started hyperventilating, and before I could talk him down, he dived. He dived so hard the pressure change ruptured his eardrums, and he never flew again. He told me later that the silence up there scared him. It's a silence that sits on your chest. Down on the ground, even in the middle of a battle, there's noise. The roar of tanks, the screams of men, the whistle of shells. But up here, there is only the hum of the engine and the sound of your own soul. If you're not comfortable with who you are, that silence will eat you alive. I banked the Spitfire, a slow, agonizingly wide turn that took forever. The German gunner opened up. I saw the tracers, pale, ghostly streaks of light that seemed to move in slow motion through the thin air. They looked beautiful, like falling stars, until one of them punched a hole through my starboard wing. The impact didn't make a loud noise. It was just a dull thud that I felt in my teeth. I didn't flinch. You can't afford to flinch when you're balanced on a needle's point. I squeezed the trigger. The Spitfire's cannons barked, and the whole plane slowed down from the recoil. At this altitude, the drag of the cannons firing is enough to nearly stall you out. I saw my shells walk across the Junker's left engine. A puff of black smoke, then a long, trailing ribbon of white vapor. Oil. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The German pilot was good, I'll give him that. He didn't dive right away. If he had, I would have been on his tail in a heartbeat. Instead, he tried to flat-hat it, maintaining his altitude and banking into me, hoping I'd stall out trying to follow. We were two ghosts dancing in a purple sky, both of us right on the edge of falling out of the heavens. I felt my engine cough. My heart skipped a beat. If the Merlin cut out now, I was a dead man. I'd be a frozen block of ice before I hit 20,000 feet. I talked to the plane. I talked to it like I used to talk to the heavy steel beams back in Brooklyn, when the wind was blowing 60 miles an hour. Hold together, sweetheart. Just a little longer. We're almost there. I saw the German gunner's face for a split second as I roared past him. He was young, maybe 19, same as me. He had a thick wool mask over his face, but I could see his eyes. They weren't full of hate. They were wide with the same primal terror I was feeling. In that moment, we weren't enemies. We were just two kids who had climbed too high and were realizing how small we were. I wondered if he had a girl back in Berlin waiting for him, or a mother who spent her nights praying to a god that seemed very far away from this frozen void. Then he fired again, and the spell broke. The bullets chewed into my fuselage, inches behind my seat. The vibration was unbearable now. My instrument panel was a blur. I kicked the rudder, forced the nose down, and let the Spitfire fall. Gravity is a funny thing. It's the one thing you can always count on. I let the plane drop, trading altitude for airspeed, feeling the controls firm up as the air got thicker. The screaming in my ears intensified as the wind began to roar over the canopy again. I looked back and saw the Junkers. He was trying to follow me down, but he wasn't built for the dive. His wings started to shed pieces, flaps, bits of cowling, glittering like diamonds in the sun. He was breaking apart. He'd stayed in the untouchable zone too long, and now that he had to come down, the atmosphere was tearing him to pieces. I watched as his left wing folded upward, snapping like a dry twig. The plane entered a violent, tumbling spin. No parachutes came out. At that altitude, even if they had jumped, they wouldn't have survived the fall or the cold. I watched him go until he disappeared into the white floor of the clouds. I leveled off at 15,000 feet. The air was thick and warm, and I could breathe again without feeling like I was swallowing glass. My hands were finally stopping their shaking. I looked at the hole in my wing and the jagged tears in the fuselage. I should have been dead. By every law of physics and every page of the flight manual, I should have been a smear on the German countryside. I flew back toward the field in Belgium, the sun setting to my west, turning the sky a deep, bloody red. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. When I finally touched down, the ground crew ran out to meet me. They looked at the plane, then at me, then back at the plane. They couldn't believe I'd brought it back. "How high did you go, Sarge?" one of them asked, his voice full of awe. I didn't answer him right away. I just climbed out, stood on the solid, muddy earth, and felt the weight of my own body. "Too high," I finally said. "I went to a place where men don't belong. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten." That night, I sat in the mess hall with Specs and Dutch. Specs was a guy from Jersey who could fix anything with a piece of wire and a swear word. Dutch was a farm boy from Iowa who moved like he was still walking through a cornfield. They were talking about the war, about the broads in London, about what they were going to do when this was all over. I just sat there, picking at my cold rations, still feeling the chill of 39,000 feet in my marrow. I couldn't tell them what it was like. How do you describe the color of the sky when it turns black in the middle of the day? How do you explain the way the silence sounds? They thought I was a hero for getting the recon plane. To me, I just felt like a thief who had stolen a glimpse of something I wasn't supposed to see. Pops O'Malley, our tech sergeant, came over and sat next to me. He was 50 if he was a day, a veteran of the Great War who had lied about his age to get back into this one. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just lit a cigarette and pushed the pack over to me. "You got that look in your eye, Sullivan," he said quietly. "The one the mountain climbers get when they come back down. You realize the world is bigger than the war, didn't you?" I looked at him, and for the first time since I'd landed, I felt like someone understood. "It's empty up there, Pops," I whispered. "It's just empty. All this fighting, all these tanks and planes, it doesn't mean a damn thing to the sky." Pops nodded, his eyes reflecting the dim light of the mess hall. "That's the secret, kid. The sky doesn't care who wins. It just waits for us to stop falling through it. But you did your job. You kept those photos from reaching their generals. You saved a lot of guys who will never know your name. That's enough for one day." I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that German gunner's eyes. I wondered what he'd been thinking in those final seconds. Did he see the beauty of the curve of the earth, or was he just cold and alone? I realized then that the untouchable sky wasn't a prize to be won. It was a mirror. It showed you exactly who you were when everything else was stripped away. No rank, no country, no bravado. Just a man in a tin box dangling over the abyss. I had always been the guy who questioned the rules, the one who thought the manuals were written by people too afraid to actually do the work. But up there, I realized the rules weren't there to restrict me. They were there to keep me human, and I'd pushed past them. The next morning, the weather turned. A thick, wet fog rolled in, grounding the entire wing. We spent the day playing cards and cleaning gear. The transition from the ethereal purple heights to the mud and the smell of wet wool was jarring. It felt like I was living in two different worlds. One was clean and cold and silent. The other was dirty and loud and crowded. I found myself looking up at the fog, trying to pierce through it, wanting to be back up there even though I knew it nearly killed me. It's a sickness, I think. Once you've been that high, the earth feels a little too small, a little too heavy. You start to feel like a bird with its wings clipped, hopping around in the dirt while the sun shines on the clouds above you. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. A few days later, we got word that the 101st had held their position. The reconnaissance that Junkers was supposed to deliver never arrived, and the Germans hadn't known where the weak point in the line was. My CO called me into his office and told me they were putting me up for the Distinguished Flying Cross. He was beaming, proud of his high-altitude ace. I just nodded and said thank you. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a survivor. I thought about the iron workers back in Brooklyn, the men who died when a gust of wind caught a sheet of plywood and sent them screaming into the pavement. There are no medals for them. There are no ceremonies. There's just a vacant spot on the beam the next morning. That's how the war felt to me then. We were just workers, doing a dangerous job in a high place, hoping we'd be the ones to go home at the end of the shift. I stayed in the cockpit until the end of the war, but I never went back up to 39,000. I stayed in the thick air, down where the dogfights were messy and fast and full of noise. I did my job, I protected my bombers, and I watched friends disappear in blossoms of fire. But every time I saw a high-altitude contrail streaking across the blue, I'd feel a phantom chill in my bones. I'd remember the way the Spitfire hummed when it was gasping for breath, and the way the sun looked when it didn't have any air to shine through. I'd remember that the Germans thought they were untouchable, and I'd remember that nothing in this world, no wall, no ceiling, no ocean, is truly out of reach if you're willing to pay the price to get there. The war ended in a blur of gray, rainy days and the hollow feeling of victory. When I got back to Brooklyn, my old man was waiting at the pier. He looked older, grayer, his hands gnarled from 40 years of gripping a wrench. He didn't ask me how many planes I'd shot down. He didn't ask me about the medals. He just looked at my face, hugged me hard, and said, "You got the look, Frank. You've seen the edge, haven't you?" I just nodded. We went back to the high steel a week later. My first day back, I was standing on a girder 50 floors up, looking out over the city. A kid, a new apprentice, was shaking like a leaf next to me. He looked down at the streets below and turned white as a sheet. I put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't look down, kid," I told him. "And don't look up either. Just look at the steel. The steel is the only thing that's real." I never told this story for 70 years. Not to my wife, not to my kids. They knew I flew planes, and they knew I was a war hero, but they didn't need to know about the purple sky. They didn't need to know about the silence. I think I was afraid that if I talked about it, I'd lose the feeling of the sun on my skin. I was afraid that the cold would come back and never leave. But I'm an old man now. My friends are all gone. Specs died in '82, Dutch went 10 years ago, and Pops probably reached the ceiling long before any of us. I'm the last one left to tell the sky's secrets. I want people to know that it wasn't just about the shooting. It was about the courage to go where the world ends and still try to remain a man. It was about the fact that even at the very top of the world, we're all just human, terrified and brave all at once. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember one specific moment right after the Junkers went down. I was leveling off, and for a few seconds, the engine hit a perfect frequency. The vibration stopped. The silence was absolute. I looked out the canopy, and I could see the curve of the Earth, a gentle, blue arc against the blackness of space. It was so peaceful, so indifferent to the fire and the blood on the ground. I realized then that the sky doesn't belong to the Spitfires or the Messerschmitts. It doesn't belong to the generals or the kings. It belongs to itself. We are just visitors, granted a few moments of clarity before we have to fall back down to the mud. That clarity is what I've carried with me all these years. It's what allowed me to walk the steel without fear, and what allowed me to face the end of my life with a quiet heart. The Germans learned that day that they weren't untouchable, and I learned that the only thing truly untouchable is the truth you find when you're too high to lie to yourself. The Spitfire Mark 7 was a beautiful machine, but it was a trap. It gave you the illusion of being a god. It let you fly above the clouds, above the war, above the misery of the trenches. But it couldn't keep you there. Eventually, the fuel runs low, the oxygen runs out, and the gravity you tried to ignore comes back to claim its due. That's the lesson of the war, I think. You can climb as high as you want, you can build the tallest buildings or fly the fastest planes, but you always have to come home. And home is where the people are. Home is where the mud is. I'm glad I came home. I'm glad I got to grow old and feel the warmth of a fire and the weight of a grandchild in my arms. The high sky is for the ghosts. This world, this heavy, messy, loud world, this is for the living. I still go down to the shore sometimes in Brooklyn and look up at the jets streaking across the sky. They fly higher and faster than I ever dreamed of. I wonder if the pilots up there ever feel what I felt. I wonder if they ever see the purple sky and the black void. I hope they do. I hope they realize how lucky they are to be able to come back down. Because the higher you go, the more you realize that the most important thing isn't the altitude. It's the man you are when you finally touch the ground. I was just a kid from Brooklyn who went for a walk in the heavens and came back with a little bit of the stars in my eyes. That's enough for me. That's more than enough. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The Merlin engine is a sound you never forget. It's not like a modern jet, all smooth and clinical. It's a mechanical beast, 1,000 tiny explosions happening every second, all held together by steel and hope. When I'm sitting in my chair at night, I can still hear it. I can feel the vibration in the soles of my feet. It's a ghost that follows me, a reminder of the time I defied the world and lived to tell about it. I don't regret a single second of it. Not the cold, not the fear, not the loneliness. It made me who I am. It gave me a perspective that few men ever get to have. And if I could go back, if I could stand on that pier in 1944 and choose my path again, I'd still climb into that cockpit. I'd still push that throttle, because once you've seen the world from 39,000 feet, you never look at a blue sky the same way again. You know what's hiding behind the blue. You know the truth of the black, and you know that as long as there are men willing to fly, no part of the heavens will ever be untouchable. I think about the German gunner sometimes, especially in the winter. I hope he found peace. I hope that in those last moments, he wasn't thinking about the war or the photos or the crosses on his wings. I hope he saw the curve of the earth and realized that he was part of something bigger than a 1,000-year Reich. We were both just boys, lost in the clouds, trying to find our way home. I made it back, and he didn't. That's the mystery of it all. There's no rhyme or reason to who lives and who dies in a war. It's just the luck of the draw, a gust of wind, a bolt that holds or a bolt that snaps. I've spent 70 years trying to be worthy of the luck I had. I've tried to live a life that was solid and honest, a life that meant something to the people around me. As I sit here now, the sun is coming up over the rooftops of New York. It's a pale, golden light, the kind that makes the windows sparkle. It looks a lot like the sun did at 35,000 feet before it turned harsh and white. I can feel the warmth of it on my face, and it feels good. It feels real. I'm finally ready to let the memories go, to let them drift up into the sky where they belong. I've said my piece. I've told the story of the day the Spitfires owned the roof of the world. And now, I think I'll just sit here for a while and enjoy the air. It's thick, it's warm, and it's right where I belong. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The sky is a vast, beautiful graveyard of dreams, but it's also the place where we find our strength. Every pilot who ever pushed a stick forward, every sailor who ever looked at the horizon, every soldier who ever stood his ground, we all were just trying to reach a little bit higher than we were the day before. I'm just glad I got to be part of it. I'm glad I got to see the untouchable and prove that it wasn't. Now the sky is quiet, and the war is a shadow in the history books. But for me, it's still right there, 39,000 feet up, waiting in the silence. And that's where I'll leave it. That's where it belongs. The pressure cabin of that Spitfire 7 was a marvel of engineering, but it felt like a coffin made of glass and thin aluminum. You're sitting in this pressurized bubble, and you can hear the seals hissing, a constant, high-pitched reminder that if one of those rubber gaskets fails, your lungs are going to turn inside out. It was a strange kind of war up there. Down low, you had the smell of burning rubber, the sight of tracers, the chaos of 1,000 planes. But at 40,000 feet, it was just you and the machine, and the terrifying knowledge that you were breathing air that was being forced into your throat by a pump. It didn't feel natural. Every breath felt like a chore, like you were blowing up a balloon that never quite filled. I remember looking at my fingernails and seeing them turn a faint shade of blue. Hypoxia is a sneaky bastard. It doesn't hit you like a punch. It's more like a warm blanket that someone wraps around your brain, telling you that everything is fine, that you're doing great, right as you're about to fall into a permanent sleep. I had to keep talking to myself, reciting the names of the streets back in Brooklyn just to make sure my mind was still sharp. DeKalb, Flatbush, Atlantic, Nostrand, over and over, a litany of home to keep the ghost of the high sky at bay. One afternoon, a week after I'd downed that Junkers, the brass sent me back up. This time, they wanted me to shadow a group of B-17s that were heading deep into Germany. These weren't your standard forts. They were a specialized group carrying some kind of sensitive equipment, and the higher-ups were worried about the Arado 234, the new German jet. The jet could fly faster than anything we had, and it could cruise at altitudes that would make a Mustang choke. I was the insurance policy. I took off from the field at Ghent, the mud splashing up against the belly of my clean, polished bird. I felt like a thoroughbred being forced to run in a swamp. But as soon as the wheels tucked into the wells and I pointed that nose at the sun, the mud didn't matter. I climbed through 10, 20, 30,000 feet, watching the blue world fall away. The sky turned that familiar, bruised purple, and the cold started to seep in through the soles of my boots. My hands were gripped tight on the spade grip of the stick. I could feel every ripple in the air, every tiny adjustment the trim tabs made. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I spotted the B-17s at 32,000. They looked like tiny silver toys, leaving long white streaks of condensation behind them. The fingers of God, we used to call them. It was a beautiful sight, but a deadly one. Those contrails were a roadmap for every Luftwaffe pilot within 50 miles. I stayed 5,000 feet above them, circling like a hawk. I was in the dead zone, where the air is too thin to sustain a dogfight, but thick enough to kill you if you lose concentration. My engine was running at high boost, the supercharger whining in its second stage, a sound like a dentist's drill that vibrates right through your skull. Then, I saw it. A tiny black speck, moving way too fast to be a piston-engine plane. It was coming from the east, level with the bombers but closing the distance at a terrifying rate. It was an Arado. It was sleek, twin-engined, and it didn't have a propeller. It looked like something from a comic book, a silver dart cutting through the heavens. The jet pilot didn't see me. Why would he? Nobody flew at 37,000 feet unless they were in a jet or a pressurized bird like mine. He was lining up for a run on the lead B-17, probably planning to use his superior speed to zoom in, rake the bomber with cannon fire, and disappear before the escorting Mustangs even knew he was there. I felt a surge of that old Brooklyn adrenaline. My father used to say that the biggest guy on the construction site was always the easiest to trip if you move faster than he expected. This jet was the big guy, and I was the one standing on the beam above him. I didn't dive right away. If I dived, I'd build up too much speed, and my controls would lock up in the compressibility of the thin air. I had to be precise. I waited until he was committed to his attack run, his nose beginning to drop toward the tail of the fortresses. I rolled the Spitfire onto its back and pulled through. The G-force hit me like a physical weight, pressing me down into my seat until my vision started to gray at the edges. I was breathing hard, the oxygen mask flapping against my face with every gasp. I came down on him from his 5 o'clock high, the sun at my back. I was screaming toward him at over 400 miles an hour, the airframe vibrating so violently I thought the rivets were going to pop out like champagne corks. I saw the pilot's head turn. I saw the sun glint off his canopy. He was shocked. You could see it in the way the jet twitched, a panicked move to the left that he shouldn't have made. He thought he was the only thing in the sky that could move that fast at that height. I didn't give him time to correct his mistake. I led him by a full 3 lengths and squeezed the trigger. The 20mm cannons on a Spitfire are a different beast than the machine guns on a Mustang. They don't just poke holes, they tear things apart. I saw the shells impact his right engine nacelle, a spray of sparks, then a bright magnesium-white flash. The jet engine didn't just smoke, it disintegrated. Shards of metal flew off, one of them glancing off my own canopy with a terrifying crack. I pulled up hard, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked back and saw the Arado spiraling down, one wing trailing a long plume of fire that looked orange and angry against the purple sky. The pilot managed to bail out. I saw the tiny white puff of his parachute way down below, but the jet was gone. It hit the cloud bank and vanished. I sat there gasping for air, the silence of the high altitude rushing back in to fill the void left by the cannons. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I stayed with the bombers until they hit the coast, but I was a wreck. My hands were shaking so hard I had to use both of them to keep the stick steady. It wasn't just the fight, it was the exertion of fighting the plane in that thin air. It takes everything you have just to stay level. When I finally touched down back at the field, I sat in the cockpit for 10 minutes after the engine stopped. I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead, and my chest was sore from the pressure breathing. Specs, my head mechanic, climbed up on the wing and peered into the cockpit. He saw the crack in the glass and the look in my eyes. He didn't say a word. He just handed me a flask of coffee that was mostly chicory and sugar. I took a sip, and it was the best thing I'd ever tasted. It tasted like the ground. It tasted like being alive. "You got one of the blowtorches, didn't you, Frank?" Specs asked, his voice low. He was looking at the soot on my wings. I just nodded. "He didn't think I was there," I whispered. "He thought he was alone up there." Specs patted the side of the fuselage. "Nobody's ever alone when you're in the air, kid. There's always someone higher, or someone faster, or someone just luckier." That was the truth of it. The Germans had spent years developing that jet technology, thinking it would save them, thinking it would give them back the sky they'd lost in '40. They didn't realize that we were just as desperate, just as crazy and willing to push our old-fashioned piston engines to the very breaking point just to knock them down. Back in Brooklyn, when we were building the Empire State Building, there was a guy named Sully. No relation, just a coincidence. Sully was a veteran of the iron, a man who'd been on the beam since he was 12. He told me once that the most dangerous part of the job isn't the height. It's the moment you start to feel comfortable. When you stop respecting the drop, that's when the drop catches you. I thought about that Arado pilot. He'd gotten comfortable. He thought his technology made him a god. He forgot that the sky is a jealous mistress, and she doesn't like it when you think you've mastered her. I never let myself get comfortable after that day. Every time I climbed past 30,000, I treated that plane and that air like they were a loaded gun pointed at my head. It's the only reason I'm still here to tell you this. I remember the briefings we'd get from the intelligence officers. They'd show us these grainy photos and charts about service ceilings and rate of climb. They talked about the war like it was a math problem. But math doesn't account for the way your stomach drops when the engine misses a beat at 40,000 feet. It doesn't account for the smell of your own sweat inside a cold rubber mask. The reality of high-altitude combat was a lonely, clinical sort of violence. You didn't see the blood. You didn't hear the screams. You just saw the machine break, and the man inside become a speck falling toward a world that didn't want him back. It was a clean way to kill, and that's what made it so haunting. You could do it and then be back in the mess hall for dinner, eating canned peaches and laughing with the boys, while a few miles away, a family was getting a telegram. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Dutch, the farm boy from Iowa, was my tent mate. He was a ground pounder, a sergeant in the 2nd Infantry. Sometimes our paths would cross when he was back on R&R near our airfield. He'd look at my clean uniform and my polished boots and shake his head. "You got it easy, Frank," he'd say, nursing a warm beer. "You fly up there in the clouds, do your business, and come back to a real bed. I'm out here sleeping in a hole with 3 inches of water and a dead German for a neighbor." I never argued with him. How could I? He was right. I had a bed and I had hot food most nights, but I also had a nightmare that lived 6 miles up. I had the pressure suit that squeezed my ribs until I wanted to scream. I had the constant gnawing fear that a single piece of frozen condensation in a fuel line would turn my plane into a multi-ton glider over enemy territory. We both had our versions of hell. Mine just happened to have a better view. I remember one night, Dutch and I were sitting outside the tent watching the searchlights sweep the sky over toward the front lines. The sound of distant artillery was a constant low rumble, like a summer storm that never quite breaks. "Do you ever think about what happens after?" Dutch asked. He was cleaning his M1 Garand, his fingers moving with a practiced rhythmic grace. "After the war, I mean. If we make it." I looked up at the stars, trying to pick out the ones I'd seen from the cockpit. "I think I'm going to build something," I said. "Something that stays on the ground. No more flying, no more high steel. Just a house, maybe? Somewhere quiet." Dutch laughed, a dry, raspy sound. "You're a liar, Frank. You're a high steel man. You'll be back on the beams before the ink is dry on the peace treaty. You can't help yourself. You need the view." He was right, of course. But that night, under the cold Belgian sky, the idea of a quiet life seemed like the most radical thing in the world. There was a captain in our wing named Miller. Miller was a by-the-book guy, an Annapolis grad who thought that flying a Spitfire was an exercise in discipline and regulations. He hated my guts because I flew by feel. I didn't spend my time studying the technical manuals. I spent my time listening to the engine. One morning, Miller pulled me aside after a patrol. "Sullivan, you're pushing those birds too hard," he barked, his face turning a shade of red that matched his hair. "I saw your telemetry. You were over-revving that Merlin at altitude. You're going to blow a cylinder and lose a valuable aircraft." I looked him dead in the eye. "Captain," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it, "the manual was written for a pilot who wants to live forever. I'm just trying to live through the afternoon. That Junkers wasn't going to wait for me to check my manifold pressure." He didn't have an answer for that, but he put me on extra duty for a week. That was the military for you. You save a mission, and they give you a shovel. But the shovel work gave me time to think. It gave me time to watch the ground crew. People don't realize how much the mechanics mattered. A pilot gets the glory, but a mechanic gives him the chance to earn it. Specs was a wizard. He'd stay up all night with a flashlight in his mouth, digging through the guts of my Spitfire to find a tiny leak in the glycol system. He knew that at high altitude, a tiny leak becomes a fountain. He talked to the plane while he worked on it, whispering to it like a nervous horse. "Come on, baby. Don't you fail him now. He's a good kid, even if he is from Brooklyn." When I'd climb into that seat the next morning, I knew I was safe because Specs had put his soul into that machine. That's the brotherhood no one tells you about. It wasn't just the guys in the air. It was the guys with the grease under their fingernails who never got a medal. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. By December of '44, the weather turned into a nightmare. The Battle of the Bulge had started, and the fog was so thick you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. We were grounded for days, sitting in the mud while we heard the reports coming in about the 101st being surrounded at Bastogne. It was agonizing. We knew our boys were dying down there, and we were stuck on the ground because the ceiling had dropped to zero. I go out to the flight line and just stand by my plane, feeling the cold rain run down my neck. I felt helpless. Up at 40,000 feet, I was a king. Down here, I was just another muddy soldier waiting for the sun to come back. That's the thing about being a specialist. When the conditions aren't perfect, you're useless. I hated it. I wanted to be in the foxholes with Dutch. At least then I'd be doing something. Then, on the 23rd of December, the Great Blue happened. The high-pressure system moved in, and the sky cleared like someone had pulled back a curtain. Every plane that could fly was in the air within an hour. The sound was incredible. Hundreds of engines roaring to life at once, a symphony of vengeance. I was sent up high again, told to keep the Luftwaffe away, while the Thunderbolts and Mustangs went to work on the German columns. From 35,000 feet, I could see the whole battle unfolding. It looked like a map in a general's tent. I saw the black smoke from the burning tanks, the white trails of the rockets, the tiny flashes of the artillery. It was beautiful and horrific all at once. I saw a column of German panzers caught on a narrow road, and then I saw the P-47s dive. It was like watching a scythe through wheat. I was so focused on the ground that I almost missed the 3 Me-109s climbing toward me. They were the G-10 models, Gustavs, designed for high-altitude work. They didn't have the speed of the jet, but they were maneuverable, and there were 3 of them. I was alone. I felt that cold knot tighten in my stomach. This was it. No more hiding in the purple sky. I had to fight my way out. I remember the smell of the cordite from my own guns when I cleared them with a short burst. It's a sharp, acrid smell that wakes up your senses. I dived toward the lead 109, trying to take him out before the other 2 could bracket me. We went into a rolling scissors, 2 planes dancing on the edge of a stall in air so thin it felt like we were flying through a vacuum. My Spitfire shuddered as I pulled the nose up. I was right on the verge of a flick roll, the wingtips vibrating violently. I saw the German's face as we crossed. He was wearing a leather helmet and a thick oxygen mask just like me. For a second, our eyes met. It's a strange thing to see the man who is trying to kill you. It makes it personal. It's not just a plane anymore. It's a person with a life and a family and a fear of falling. I kicked the rudder and dropped my flaps, a desperate move to shed speed and force him to overshoot. It worked. He shot past my nose, and for a heartbeat, his belly was exposed. I didn't miss. My shells tore into his fuel tank, and he turned into a ball of orange fire. There was no smoke. The air was too thin, just a bright, clean explosion that looked like a firework against the deep blue sky. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The other 2 109s didn't stick around. When they saw their leader go down, they dived for the deck. They knew that in a turning fight at that altitude, the Spitfire was king. I didn't follow them. I didn't have the energy, and I was low on oxygen. I leveled out and watched the fire from the German plane disappear as it fell. I felt a strange sense of exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that no amount of sleep could fix. I'd survived another day, but the cost was starting to pile up, not in blood but in pieces of my soul. Every time you kill a man, you lose a little bit of the person you were before the war. You try to tell yourself it's for the greater good, that you're saving your friends, but the face in the mirror doesn't believe you. After the bulge, the war started to move fast. We were jumping from airfield to airfield, moving deeper into Germany. The high-altitude missions became less frequent because the Luftwaffe was running out of fuel and pilots. They were grounded, their beautiful planes hidden under trees and camouflage nets, waiting for a drop of petrol that would never come. I started flying more low-level missions, strafing trains and convoys. I hated it. It was dirty work. You could see the horses in the fields jumping the fences when you roared over. You could see the people running for the ditches. It lacked the purity of the high sky. Down low, the war was ugly and intimate. It smelled like burning diesel and wet earth. I missed the purple void. I missed the silence. I remember one mission in April of '45. We were flying over a part of Germany that hadn't been touched by the fighting yet. It was a beautiful spring day, and the orchards were in bloom. From the air, it looked like a paradise. I was leading a flight of 4, looking for any sign of German movement. We saw a small village, and in the middle of it was a schoolhouse. The children were out in the yard, and they all stopped to look up at us. I remember thinking that those kids had no idea that I could destroy their whole world with a squeeze of a button. It made me feel sick. I signaled my flight to bank away, to leave that village alone. We were supposed to be looking for targets, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't bring the war to those children. My CO chewed me out when we got back, but I didn't care. I'd seen enough fire. The day the war ended, I was in a small town in southern Germany. We'd taken over a former Luftwaffe base, and the hangars were full of half-finished jets and experimental planes. There was no grand celebration, at least not for me. I just went out to the flight line and sat on the wing of my Spitfire. The guns were cold. The engine was silent. I looked up at the sky, and it was a perfect, clear blue. No contrails, no searchlights, no death. I realized then that I didn't have to go back up there ever again. I was 22 years old, and I felt like I was 100. I was alive, but I was a stranger to the kid who had left Brooklyn 3 years before. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. When I finally got back to New York, the city was the same, but I was different. I'd walk down the street and hear a car backfire, and I'd be halfway to the ground before I realized I wasn't in Belgium. I'd look up at the skyscrapers and see the men on the beams, and I'd feel a phantom pressure in my chest, like I was back in the oxygen mask. I went back to the ironwork, just like Dutch said I would. I needed the height. I needed to feel the wind and see the world from above, but without the guns and the killing. It was the only place I felt normal. People on the ground, they live in their little bubbles, never looking up, but when you're on the steel, you're part of the sky. You're part of the big picture. I never talked about the untouchable sky, because nobody would have understood. How do you tell someone that the most terrifying and beautiful thing you've ever seen was a black sky in the middle of the afternoon? How do you explain the brotherhood you feel with a man you tried to kill just because you both shared the same frozen air? You don't. You just keep it inside, a quiet secret that you carry through the years. But now, as I look at my hands, spotted and wrinkled, the hands of an old man, I realize that the story needs to be told. Not for me, but for the boys who didn't come back down. For the ones who are still up there, ghosts in the purple void. I want you to remember that the peace we have now was bought at a very high price. It was bought by kids who were terrified but did their jobs anyway. It was bought by mechanics who worked in the freezing mud and pilots who flew until their hearts nearly gave out. The sky is free today because we were willing to go to the edge of space to claim it. And whenever you look up and see a plane leaving a white trail against the blue, I want you to think of that. I want you to think of the silence, the cold, and the courage it took to own the sky. I'm finally at peace with it all. The nightmares are gone, replaced by the quiet hum of a life well lived. I've survived the high steel and the high sky, and I'm still standing. That's a miracle, I suppose, or maybe it's just luck. Either way, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the air in my lungs and the ground under my feet. And I'm grateful that I got to see the view, even if it was just for a little while. The Germans thought the sky was untouchable. I'm glad I was the one who proved them wrong. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember the last flight I ever took in a Spitfire. It was a ferry mission taking the bird to a scrapyard in France. The war was over, and the beautiful machines that had saved civilization were being turned into soda cans and kitchen foil. I took her up one last time, just for myself. I climbed until the sky started to turn purple. I reached 38,000 feet and leveled off. I pulled back the canopy for just a second. The pressure suit kept me alive, and I felt the absolute biting cold of the universe. It was a goodbye. I looked at the curve of the earth, said a silent prayer for all the friends I'd lost, and then I pushed the nose down. I never looked back. I've spent the rest of my life with my feet on the ground, but a part of me is still up there. It always will be. I remember a day in February of '45 when the sky decided it had had enough of me. I was pushing 41,000 feet, right at the absolute ceiling, where the air is so thin it feels like you're flying through a ghost. My cockpit heater had died 20 minutes earlier, and the frost was crawling up the inside of the glass like a living thing, white fingers reaching out to blind me. I was breathing that dry, metallic oxygen, and every time I exhaled, the mist would freeze on my mask. Then, without any warning, I heard a sound that made my soul go cold. It was a sharp, crystalline crack, like a pane of glass shattering in a winter storm. The pressure cabin had sprung a leak. In a heartbeat, the air was sucked out of that cockpit, and the physical weight of the atmosphere disappeared. My ears felt like they were being pierced by hot needles, and I could feel the blood starting to swell in my veins. The manual said you have about 15 seconds of useful consciousness at that height without pressure. 15 seconds to decide if you want to live or become a frozen statue. I didn't panic. You can't afford to panic when you've spent your youth balanced on a 4-inch I-beam over the East River. I remembered a time back in '39 when a gust of wind caught a crane load and sent it swinging right toward me. I had nowhere to go but down, so I just dropped and hung by my fingertips until the danger passed. I did the same thing in that Spitfire. I didn't think. I just reacted. I slammed the stick forward and kicked the rudder hard. I didn't just dive, I fell. I wanted to get down to 20,000 feet where the air could keep me alive, and I didn't care if I ripped the wings off the plane to get there. The screaming of the wind over the canopy was deafening, a high-pitched howl that drowned out the roar of the engine. My vision was narrowing to a tiny pinprick of light, and I could feel my brain starting to shut down, drifting off into that warm, hypoxic sleep. But I kept my hand locked on that stick. I told myself I wasn't going to let some rubber seal be the end of Frank Sullivan. I leveled off at 18,000, gasping for air like a man who'd been underwater for 3 minutes. My chest was burning, and my head felt like it was in a vice, but I was alive. I looked at the altimeter and saw the needle still spinning. I'd dropped 20,000 feet in less than a minute. The plane was groaning, the metal stressed to its limit, but it held. That's the thing about the Spitfire. It had a soul that wanted to live as much as you did. I sat there in the thick, warm air, watching the clouds go by, and I realized how close I'd come to just disappearing. Up there, at 40,000, there are no witnesses. No one sees you fall. You just stop being, and the sky closes up behind you like it never happened. It makes you realize that for all our technology and all our bravado, we're just fragile little animals playing in a playground that doesn't belong to us. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. A few days later, I was back in the air, escorting a group of mosquitoes on a low-level photo run. We were skimming the treetops, a complete reversal from my usual haunts. It was a different kind of terror. At high altitude, you worry about the vacuum and the cold. Down low, you worry about every farmer with a bolt-action rifle and every hidden flak battery. We were roaring over the German countryside, the shadows of our planes flickering over the snow-covered fields. Suddenly, my wingman, a kid named Thompson, we called him Tiny, because he was 6'4" and barely fit in the cockpit, called out over the radio, "Frank, 10 o'clock, looks like a transport." I looked over and saw a German staff car racing down a narrow road, kicking up a cloud of snow. It was a tempting target, the kind of thing they told us to hit to disrupt enemy command. I banked the Spitfire and lined up for a strafing run. I had my thumb on the firing button, the crosshairs centered on the roof of that black car. But as I got closer, I saw something that made me hesitate. The car wasn't full of officers. It was a beat-up old civilian vehicle, and there were crates tied to the roof. As I roared over at 300 miles an hour, I saw a woman in the driver's seat and a small face pressed against a rear window. It was a family, trying to escape the advancing front. I pulled my thumb back and yanked the stick, screaming over them without firing a shot. Tiny came over the radio, confused. "Why didn't you take them, Frank?" I didn't answer right away. I just watched that car disappear into the trees. "Not today, Tiny," I finally said. "That wasn't the war. That was just people." When we got back, the intelligence officer, a guy named Lieutenant Higgins who had never seen a day of combat in his life, wanted to know why I'd passed up a confirmed enemy vehicle. He was sitting there with his maps and his pencils, looking at me like I was a broken gear in a machine. "Sullivan, we have orders to interdict all movement in that sector," he said, his voice clipped and academic. I looked at him, still feeling the vibration of the engine in my bones, and I thought about the kid's face in the window. "It was a civilian car, Lieutenant," I said. "Unless you want me to start winning the war by killing 6-year-olds, I'm going to keep making those calls." He turned red and threatened to write me up, but Pops O'Malley, who was standing in the back of the room, just winked at me. Pops knew. He'd seen the Great War, and he knew that once you stop seeing the difference between a soldier and a child, you've already lost the war, no matter what the maps say. I remember talking to Pops that night behind the hangars. He was sharpening a pocket knife on a whetstone, the scritch-scritch sound a steady rhythm in the quiet evening. "You did the right thing, Frank," he said without looking up. "The brass, they see numbers, they see targets neutralized. Is-ho, but you're the one who has to live with the memory. A man's conscience is a heavy thing to carry, and the sky is already heavy enough." I asked him how he dealt with it, with all the things he'd seen. He stopped sharpening and looked at the blade. "I think of it like building a bridge," he said. "You put one piece of steel down at a time. You do the best job you can, and you try to make sure it's a bridge you're proud to walk across when it's finished. If you start cutting corners on your soul, the bridge won't hold." If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I took that advice to heart. It made me a better pilot, and a better man, I think. I started looking for the humanity even in the middle of the madness. There was one time near the end of the war when I was on a lone patrol near the Swiss border. I saw a Messerschmitt 109, a late model K4, limping along with a trail of white smoke behind it. He was done for. His engine was dying, and he was just trying to find a place to set it down. I could have finished him in 5 seconds. I could have added another kill to my record and gotten another ribbon for my chest. I pulled up alongside him, close enough to see the oil streaks on his fuselage. The pilot looked over at me. He was pale, his goggles pushed up on his forehead, and he looked like he'd aged 20 years in an hour. He didn't reach for his guns. He just looked at me, waiting for the end. I didn't fire. I gave him a slow, deliberate wing wag, the universal sign for, "I see you." I stayed with him, until he cleared a line of trees and belly landed in a flat, snow-covered meadow. I watched him climb out, stumble a few steps away from the plane, and then collapse in the snow. Alive. I banked away and headed for home. I never reported that encounter. In the official logs, that patrol was uneventful. But for me, it was one of the most important moments of the war. It was a reminder that even when we were supposed to be monsters to each other, we were still just men caught in a storm. I like to think that pilot made it home to his family. I like to think he remembers the Spitfire that didn't shoot. Back in Brooklyn, after the war, I found that the bridge Pops talked about was harder to build than I thought. The world had moved on, and people didn't want to hear about the purple sky or the moral dilemmas of a 19-year-old sergeant. They wanted to talk about the Yankees and the price of milk. I felt like a ghost, walking through a city that was too loud and too crowded. I'd be sitting at a bar, and someone would ask me what I did in the war, and I'd just say, "I flew a bit." How do you explain the untouchable sky to a guy who's never been higher than the top of a bus? You can't. So you stay quiet. You go back to the high steel, where the wind is the only thing that talks to you, and you build the city that everyone else gets to live in. I remember my first day back on the beams. I was working on a project in Lower Manhattan, and the wind was whipping off the harbor, cold and sharp. I was standing on a girder, 500 feet up, and for a split second, I forgot where I was. I felt the pressure of the oxygen mask on my face. I heard the whine of the supercharger. I looked out over the water and expected to see a flight of B-17s coming over the horizon. I stood there, frozen, until a guy yelled at me to grab the end of a rivet heater. I shook my head, took a deep breath of the thick, salty New York air, and realized I was home. The height wasn't my enemy anymore. It was my sanctuary. It was the only place where I could feel the same clarity I had at 40,000 feet, but without the killing. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I worked the steel for 40 years. I helped build the towers that defined the skyline, and I did it with the same precision I'd used to fly that Spitfire. I never forgot the lessons I learned in the sky. I never forgot Specs and his flashlights, or Dutch and his foxholes, or Pops and his whetstone. They were with me on every beam, in every rivet. I realized that the war didn't just teach me how to fight, it taught me how to live. It taught me that life is a series of decisions made in the thin air, and that the only thing that matters in the end is if you can look at yourself in the mirror and know you did your best. I lost Specs in the 80s. He'd gone back to New Jersey and opened a garage, fixing cars with the same meticulous care he'd given my Merlin engine. When I went to his funeral, I saw his old toolbox sitting in the corner of the shop, still neat and organized. I realized then that Specs hadn't just been a mechanic. He'd been a keeper of life. He'd kept me alive, and he'd kept 1,000 other people safe on the roads. He was a hero who never wore a uniform after 45, but he was a hero all the same. I stood by his casket and whispered, "The engine's running smooth, Specs. Thank you." Dutch lasted a bit longer. He stayed on that farm in Iowa, growing corn and raising a family. We'd write to each other every Christmas, a couple of old men grumbling about our knees and the way the world was changing. He never lost that ground pounder's skepticism. In his last letter he wrote, "Frank, I still look up whenever I hear a plane, and I still wonder which one of those kids is you. I hope the air is still clean up there." He passed away in his sleep, looking out over the fields he'd spent his life tending. He was a solid man, a man who knew the value of the earth. He was the anchor that kept me from drifting too far into the clouds. Now, I'm the only one left. I sit on my porch in Brooklyn and watch the sun go down over the city. The sky turns that deep, bloody orange, then the soft blue of twilight, and finally the dark velvet of night. I look for the stars, the same stars I saw from 39,000 feet, and I feel a strange sense of peace. The Germans called the high sky untouchable, but they were wrong. It touches you. It changes you. It strips away everything that doesn't matter and leaves you with the truth. And the truth is that we are all just travelers, passing through the light for a little while before we return to the silence. I'm not afraid of the silence anymore. I've heard it before, and it was beautiful. I've seen the edge of the world, and I know what's waiting on the other side. It's not a void, it's just the next horizon. I'm finally ready to climb one last time, not in a Spitfire, and not on a steel beam, but as a man who has finished his work and is ready to see the view from the very top. I've carried these memories for 70 years, and I'm glad I finally got to share them. I hope they mean something to you. I hope they remind you to look up once in a while, and to remember that the sky is never as far away as it seems. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember a conversation I had with my grandson a few years ago. He was looking at my old flight jacket, running his fingers over the cracked leather and the faded patches. "Was it scary, Grandpa?" he asked, his eyes wide with that innocent curiosity. I looked at him, and for a second I saw myself at 19, sitting in that cockpit over Germany. "Yeah, it was scary, kiddo," I said, "but it was also the only time I ever felt completely alive. When you're that high and everything is on the line, you don't have time for the small stuff. You just have the moment, and that moment is everything." He didn't quite understand, but that's okay. He doesn't need to. I fought that war so he wouldn't have to know what the purple sky looks like. I fought it so he could stay on the ground and be safe. That's the final lesson, I think. We go to the high places so the people we love can stay in the warm ones. We face the cold and the vacuum so the world can keep spinning in the sun. I'm proud of what I did. I'm proud of the Spitfires and the iron and the bridges. But mostly, I'm proud of the fact that I'm still Frank Sullivan, a kid from Brooklyn who went to the roof of the world and came back with his soul intact. The sky owned me for a little while, but I owned it right back. And that's a victory no one can ever take away. The wind is picking up now, and I can hear it whistling through the railings of the porch. It sounds like the air over the canopy, a gentle reminder of where I've been. I'll just sit here for a bit longer, watching the lights of the city come on, one by one. It's a beautiful view. It's almost as good as the one from 40,000 feet. Almost. But this one has the smell of dinner cooking and the sound of people laughing, and that makes it the best view in the world. Good night, Brooklyn. Good night, sky. We did okay. We did just fine.